So far, this city's development has been dense and urban as we chase growth and revenue. But our Sims and commercial sector are unhappy with the lack of locally produced food and the cost of groceries. So today, we'll shift our focus to the outskirts and set up a new village surrounded by farms, providing some cheaper housing and more options for local produce. Welcome back to Salmon Bay. Before we begin, I want to make a couple of fixes from the last episode, in particular around the clinic. I kind of threw this on quickly at the end without thinking it through, and I've messed it up a bit. The main issue is this intersection on the right where the alleyway comes down the hill. It's too close to the roundabout and too valuable of a path, so it gets and causes a lot of traffic. In order to keep the flow high, I turned off crosswalks and left turns here and made the alley street a one-way up the hill. It sort of fixes traffic, I guess, but the ambulances will always have to go uphill when leaving the clinic. Imagine they were responding to a call at the waterfront. An ambulance would have to drive uphill, around to a street that goes back down, pick up the patient, and drive all the way back up the hill in order to make this right turn back into the clinic. Woof. I've talked with a few people about this, and I got a smart suggestion from planner Ian to just bring this street down into the roundabout. I think this is a great idea. So first I'm going to upgrade the size of the roundabout, clean out the area I'm reworking, and then I'll come straight down with a real city street and then curve it into the roundabout like this. The clinic entrance uses these one-way streets, so I'll continue that pattern. To make the game happy, I have to connect these one-ways together with this outer loop in front of the entrance. There's enough space to put in a couple of parking spots on the side here, and then I'll fix these node conflicts by redrawing the street. The street needs to be cleaned up a little bit by taking out some of the excess crosswalks and taking the parallel parking off the street right at the roundabout entrance. Another goal I had in the last episode, which I sort of just forgot, was to have more connectivity between the downtown and the waterfront, not just the two street connections. So I will actually make another street connection between these two intersections. This passage part can then be replaced by an actual street connection over to the clinic. I'll still keep a lot of this block undeveloped for future use later on, but since it's a long block, I want to put back in a little bit of that pedestrian access. Now I'll clean everything up by finishing a few bits of landscaping and placing in a couple of replacements for the businesses that were just deleted. You can see what I mean here about this connection being valuable. Look at all this rush hour traffic going up the hill. This is much more effective than what we had before. Moving on, at this point I'm tired of talking about garbage. I keep hoping that I can afford the recycling plant, but we're still really not close. It costs nearly $1 million, and at this point I'd rather build a high school. Our garbage processing, which is the amount of garbage being eliminated by our landfill, is about half of what we need. So I'm going to add in a second small landfill to double our processing speed, and we'll be able to handle the city's garbage at least for a while. I hope this is temporary. Once the city is stable and has enough profits, I can just let the simulation run until we have the money for recycling, but we're not quite at the point where I want to do that just yet. For good measure, I'm going to add a couple more of these hazmat buildings to tip us over into the green on garbage. While we wait for some cash to build up, I'm going to expand the downtown city into some land we already own. I'm going to just continue the block pattern until I get to the base of the hill, and since we need jobs, I'll put in a small group of business industrial buildings against the hillside. Nothing too special here. That's about as much land as I want to develop right now, so I'm just letting the simulation run until we have the $300,000 to plop in the high school. I'm using the Northeast High School asset because it has this really lovely brick architecture that a lot of the older schools in Seattle have. I'm squaring the entrance to the school right at this intersection. It's also about a block away from the elementary school, so at some point I'll come back here and add a bunch of community sports facilities for the schools and the neighborhood. The high school asset just happens to fit our block size perfectly. It has quite a bit of parking, so I'm not going to add any other parking lots around it, but I do need to do some work leveling the lot before I can get all of the roads to look right. Like we talked about last time, having a high school in Salmon Bay will stop Sims who grew up here from getting locked out of jobs or education opportunities, which was forcing them to move away from the city. So this should benefit the city a lot. Shifting over to the main part of today's build, let's start developing out this flat area between our rail yard and the power plant. To start with, I need to buy the first tile of land. I want to start building a highway that will eventually make an outside connection on the south end of the map, alongside the existing rail connection. I won't finalize that connection today because I have concerns about the dummy traffic that would get generated, but I will at least start it. I'm going to aim the highway to match where the rail leaves the map and then curve it into our existing highway. This new connection will now be the primary movement of this highway because in the long run it will carry more traffic than the road going off to the power plant. I am able to keep this one lane as a free right turn though, which is both nice looking and nice driving. The village itself will be roughly triangular between the new highway, the power lines, and the new landfill. I'll start with a street running parallel to the high voltage lines, which will have the town's only commercial buildings. I'll also start the road that will run parallel to the highway. I want to have houses 3 units deep backing to the highway, so I'm measuring out a distance to make that work, and leave some buffer space as well. To continue laying out the village, I'll have to buy another chunk of land, so I'm going to once again switch gears and fill in the area around it with a bunch of farms and light industry. This existing farm here will expand into a proper size. It runs over the power lines, but with anarchy and a little bit of landscaping, we can make it look like the farmer is farming around the pylon instead of through it. At small business lots like this, I like to have a few industry buildings with one office building. I like to think it looks like a single company with a few buildings clustered here, including office space for the corporate side, and also a parking lot since Sims will have to drive to work here. I accidentally did this off camera, but this is the village's main street and the only area for commercial and density. There's one apartment building and a couple of auto-oriented commercial buildings and a park underneath the power lines. Later, I'll also add some service buildings to this part of the village, but the rest of the build will be single-family housing and farms. Now it's time to buy the next tile of land and lay out the rest of the village. My goal is to have a loose sort of semi-grid with cul-de-sacs to give it that neighborhoody vibe. I want it to have a lot of houses, but not be that easy to traverse through with cars, only being really viable for local traffic. The somewhat disorganized structure makes it feel older and more like a contained suburban community that might resist being urbanized if Salmon Bay ever spreads over this far. There are still a lot of right angles and straight roads, but there isn't too much thought behind roadway hierarchy here, which I'm doing on purpose. With the streets laid out, I'll fill in the rest of the outer edges with more farms and then start zoning in houses. It'll be relatively dense, single-family houses, typically around 3x3 in size. I like the compact size of 3x3 homes for this area. It reminds me of smaller homes in older neighborhoods. And also in the Southwest USA set, there are a lot of 4-unit deep houses that have rear access driveways, which I am not going to build around. I'll manually plop a lot of the houses around cul-de-sacs and in corners to make the neighborhood a little more crowded than what the game's grid does. And it's more realistic for the village aesthetic that I'm going for. Another thing I'll make sure to include as I fill in is parks, especially playgrounds, with plenty of pedestrian paths connecting blocks to make it easy for families to get around the village. And you might catch that one of the new houses burns down before a fire truck can arrive from Salmon Bay, so I'll be adding a fire station around the village main. This is good since there's also quite a bit of industry out here, and if there was a fire at the power plant, it would devastate our city economy. I'll get everything zoned in and then we'll get to detailing. I'm putting in grassy strips along most of the roads in the village while keeping some street parking. What I'm imagining here is a neighborhood with no HOAs where the city has installed these green spaces along the streets, but the maintenance is left up to developers and homeowners. As a result, these streets will look pretty different block to block or even house to house as different people plant different types of street trees, bushes, raised beds, whatever. Some of the trees will be oversized or undersized, and in the gaps behind houses I'll put in larger trees that are native to the area. I'll also plant extra bushes and trees into yards. It might seem a little over the top, but this is what happens in real life. Just look at some of these neighborhoods on Google Earth. There are trees absolutely everywhere, and the street decorations can be very different. Okay, that's 2 blocks down so far, and I think this is a great start. This is pretty time consuming, so I'll just skip ahead. Ah, look at that. So many trees. See, this really reminds me of home. The tree coverage is dense, the blocks feel unique from each other, and most of the residents here have cared for their gardens. This neighborhood feels very distinct compared to the rest of the city, and I think that's worth the time and effort we put in here. The last development I'll do here in the village is plop a couple more service buildings. A few services are having a hard time covering this area, which is leaking efficiency at the power plant and hurting the economy, so I'll place a small police station and a small post office here. And while we're at it, the road maintenance building. Our village needs a name, and I have just the thing for it. We've talked about the European and American settlers who founded Seattle, but we need to also remember the thousands of Native Americans that lived on this map too. Since Salmon Bay is my own little fantasy world, I want to imagine a city that was developed with and by Native Americans. The reality was very different. For example, the Duwamish people that lived in this geography when Seattle was founded were never given recognition from the US government, in spite of promises. In this build, instead, Salmon Bay is native, so I'll give this village a Duwamish name that a nearby real-life Duwamish community had. It's easy enough to reimagine the relationship between the city and the native population, but it's another thing to rewrite the history of the way Native Americans were treated by the US government. Maybe we can find some way to make that retcon make sense too. Anyway, let's get the name in. A little bit south of here, along a bend in the river, was a village named approximately Tukweltied, and that's what I'm going to call this village. It roughly translates to fishing spear, at least according to my primary source, this biography, Chief Seattle and the town that took his name. That's the end of the build, but I've decided to squeeze in one little detail, which is to fill in this little grass area between the roundabout and the slip road. First, I'm giving it a curb using a retaining wall, making sure it's flat and very low. Then I'm drawing in two surfaces. One is a vanilla concrete and the other is a pastel red surface from Paradox Mods. I'm trying to emulate the red asphalt that's often used as overrun, like this intersection here. I used the area bucket mod to fill in the space, but took a few extra minutes to move around the surface's nodes to make it look exactly right. We are back to having some highway pedestrians, but we're going to have to address that next time because this is the end of episode 4. We've expanded city services, added some new sprawl, and built a stronger economy. Come back next time for more Salmon Bay. Good night.